I have been married twice in my life. Once to a man. Once to my silence. The man is gone. The silence is still here, sitting in his chair by the window every morning, drinking his coffee, looking at me. I am 91 years old. I have outlived my husband by 6 years, my certainty by much longer. And I am going to tell you something that no one in my family has been allowed to say out loud because I made it that way. Because I built a house where love was assumed, never spoken, and I called that house stability. You may think this story is about grief. It isn't. Grief is clean. What I carry is something older and less forgivable than grief. This is about the thing you are doing right now. Today. The thing you've been doing for years, without realizing it has a name. I know it better than most because I perfected it. 53 years of marriage. 53 years of course he knows. 53 years of love that lived entirely inside me and almost never made it across the room. He deserved more than what I gave him. But by the time I understood that, he was already walking out the door for the last time and I let him go without saying a word. I was raised by a woman who showed love through ironed shirts and hot meals on the table at 6 o'clock sharp. My mother never once said I love you to my father in front of us. Not once in 38 years of marriage that I witnessed. And yet no one doubted that she did. It was simply understood. Love, in our house, was a fact like the floor under your feet. You didn't announce the floor. You stood on it and were grateful it held. I carried that into my own marriage like a piece of furniture I'd inherited without choosing. When I met Thomas, I was 26. He was 30. He laughed too loudly in restaurants and apologized to waiters when they got his order wrong, apologized to them, as if he had caused the trouble. I found that embarrassing for the first year. By the third year I had stopped noticing. By the 10th, I couldn't remember why it had bothered me at all. He said I love you easily. Casually, almost. In the morning before work. Hanging up the phone. Sometimes just passing me in the hallway, touching my shoulder, saying it the way you'd say it's raining simply because it was true and he saw no reason not to name it. I would say, or, you too. Or sometimes I'd squeeze his hand and say nothing at all, and I told myself that was enough. That he knew. That a woman who stays, who cooks, who builds a life from scratch beside a man for decade after decade, surely that is the declaration. Surely the staying is the saying. That is what I told myself. What I did not tell myself, what I refused to look at directly, the way you refused to look at the sun, was that Thomas had stopped saying it first sometime around our 35th year. I noticed. I noticed the way you notice a clock has stopped, not immediately, but in the new quality of the silence. Something was missing from the air and it took me weeks to identify what. He hadn't stopped loving me. I want to be clear about that. He had simply learned. He had learned, after 35 years of reaching toward me and finding a polite, warm, closed door, he had learned to stop reaching. Not with cruelty. Not with anger. With the quiet resignation of a man who has finally accepted the temperature of the room he lives in. And God help me, I felt relieved. The pressure was gone. No more soft ambushes in the hallway. No more words hanging in the air waiting for me to match them. I told myself we had matured past that. I told myself this was what long marriage looked like, comfortable, unspoken, solid as the floor. I did not ask myself why I couldn't say it. I knew why. I just never made myself stand in front of that knowing and look at it plainly. I was afraid that if I said it, really said it, with my whole chest behind it, I would be exposed in some way I couldn't take back. That he would see how much I needed him, and that need felt like a door left unlocked. I had spent my whole life keeping every door locked. I did not know how to live any other way. So I loved him like a secret. For 53 years, I loved him like something I was hiding even from myself. There was a Tuesday in 1987 when our daughter Clara called from university, crying. Some trouble with a boy, the kind that feels like the end of the world at 19. Thomas sat with the phone pressed to his ear for 40 minutes. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching him. He said, "I know, sweetheart. I know. I love you so much. It's going to be okay because you are so loved." He said it 3 times. Freely. Without hesitation. Without seeming to calculate the cost of it. When he hung up he looked tired and soft around the eyes. I handed him a cup of tea. He smiled at me. I said, "She'll be fine." That was all I gave him. "She'll be fine." He nodded and took the tea and we sat together in the kitchen for another hour and I never once said, "You are a wonderful father. I am grateful every day that I chose you." Both of those things were true. I thought them clearly, sitting right there at that table. I just didn't release them. I held them inside me like I was keeping them safe, not understanding that words held too long don't stay fresh. They turn into something heavier. They become a debt. In the spring of 2003, we went back to the town in County Clare where we had honeymooned in 1971. Thomas had planned it for months without telling me, had written letters, actual paper letters, to a small hotel on the coast to confirm a room with a sea view because he remembered I had loved waking up to the water 32 years before. We were in our 60s by then. His hair was white. My knees ached on the stairs. On the second evening we sat on a stone wall above the Atlantic and the light went gold and then pink and then a deep bruised violet and Thomas reached over and took my hand and didn't say anything at all. Just held it. And I felt something rise in my throat, words, the real ones, the ones I had been holding back for 30 years, and I swallowed them. I turned it into a squeeze of the hand. I looked back at the water. He deserved to hear them. Right then, on that wall, with that light. He had earned them, with the letters to the hotel and the memory of a window I had loved before our children were born. I gave him a squeeze of the hand instead. I have thought about that wall every single day for the last 6 years. The last good year was 2017. Thomas was 82 and moving more slowly. He had a chair by the sitting room window he had claimed completely his chair, his cup, his particular angle of morning light. Some mornings I would stand at the kitchen door and watch him read his newspaper in that light, and something in my chest would do a thing I had no word for. A kind of ache that was also gratitude. A recognition that this ordinary man in this ordinary chair in this particular light was the architecture of my entire life. I never walked through that doorway and told him so. I would turn back to the sink. I would rinse a cup that didn't need rinsing. I would think, later. Tonight. At dinner. I'll say something at dinner. I did not say something at dinner. I told myself I would have time. That was the lie I loved most, in the end. Not a dramatic lie. Not a cruel one. Just a small, domestic, everyday lie that I told myself on a Tuesday and then again on a Wednesday and then for 30 more years until the morning I no longer could. He died on a Thursday. That is the sentence I have never been able to make sound like what it was. He died on a Thursday. It sounds like a fact. It was the end of everything I had assumed was permanent. It was February. Early morning, the kind of cold that makes the window glass sweat on the inside. Thomas had been unwell for 3 weeks, a chest infection that had moved into something slower and more serious. The doctors used words I wrote down on a notepad and then couldn't read back because my handwriting had gone strange. He was home. We had decided together, quietly, that home was where he would stay. That morning I woke before him, which was unusual. He was always the early one. I lay still for a moment listening to his breathing. It was there. Slow, but there. I got up. I put the kettle on. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the February light come up over the garden, pale and thin, the color of old paper. I made 2 cups of tea. I put his on the tray with a biscuit, the plain ones he liked, and I carried it to the bedroom door and I stopped. I don't know why I stopped. The tray was in my hands. The tea was hot. His cup was right there. I stood at that door for what I now believe was the last real moment of choice I have ever had in my life, and I told myself he was sleeping and I didn't want to wake him. I told myself later. I told myself after breakfast. I'll sit with him after breakfast and I'll say something. I'll finally say the thing. I set his cup on the hall table outside the door. I went back to the kitchen. I drank my tea standing at the window, watching a bird I couldn't name move through the bare branches of the apple tree. 40 minutes later I went back to the bedroom. The cup on the hall table was still there. Still full. Cold by then. I opened the door. He was gone. Quietly, the way he had lived. No drama. No final words. Just Thomas, in the early morning light, having left without my saying a single one of the things I had been saving up for later. I stood in the doorway holding the cold cup of tea. That was it. No last conversation. No held hand at the final moment. No I love you across a morning room with the light coming through the window. Just a closed door I hadn't opened in time. Just a cup of tea gone cold in the hall. Just all the words I had been keeping safe inside me, still there, still mine, absolutely useless now. I sat down on the floor of the hallway. Not because my legs gave way. Because there was nowhere else to go. I have spent 6 years trying to find the right name for what I did. For 53 years of course he knows. For 30 years of later. For a lifetime of love kept so carefully inside me that it never got to do its only actual job, which is to land on another person and let them feel it. I used to call it restraint. I was proud of it, once. I thought it made me dignified. Steady. The kind of woman who doesn't gush, doesn't perform, doesn't need to narrate her own feelings like a radio broadcast. I thought silence was a form of strength. It isn't. I know that now with the certainty of someone who has paid the full price for being wrong. Silence isn't strength. Silence is just fear with better posture. What I practiced for 9 decades was not dignity. It was self-protection dressed up as dignity. I was afraid of exposure, afraid of need, afraid that if I said I love you with my whole self behind it, I would become someone I couldn't control. Someone soft. Someone who could be hurt. So I kept the words inside where they were safe, and I called that safety love, and I let a man spend 53 years living just slightly outside the full warmth of what I felt for him. He never complained. That was the worst part. He was not a man who would have made me feel guilty for it. He simply adjusted. The way people adjust to a room that runs a little cold. You put on a sweater. You stop expecting the temperature to change. You love the room anyway because it is your room, because it is home, because the alternative is leaving and you would never leave. He never left, and I never warmed the room. Here is what I want to ask you, and I am asking you directly, not gently, because I am 91 years old and I have no patience left for gentleness when gentleness is just another word for not quite saying the thing. Who are you doing this to right now, not who did you do it to? Who are you doing it to today? This week? In the house you live in, at the table you sit at, in the bed you share or used to share or wish you still shared. I know what you are telling yourself because I told myself the same thing for 5 decades. You are telling yourself they know. That the staying is the saying. That love this long doesn't need to be announced, it's structural, it's assumed, it's written into every ordinary morning the two of you have survived together. You are telling yourself later. You are telling yourself tonight at dinner or this weekend or when things settle down or when I find the right moment. I had the right moment on a stone wall above the Atlantic with the light going gold and his hand in mine. I had it on a Tuesday in the kitchen when he hung up from talking to our daughter and his eyes were tired and soft. I had it every morning for 17 years when I stood at the kitchen door watching him read in his chair in the light he loved. I saved every one of those moments for later. Later came on a Thursday in February. Later was a cold cup of tea in an empty hallway. You think you have more time than I did. You may be right. But here is what I know with absolute certainty, having lived 91 years inside this one particular silence, you are not waiting for the right moment. You are waiting to feel less afraid. And that feeling, that specific fear of being fully seen by the person you love most, does not go away on its own. It does not dissolve with time. It calcifies. It becomes the architecture of your relationship. It becomes the temperature of the room. And one day the person you love will stop reaching for you, not with anger, not with cruelty, but with the quiet acceptance of someone who has finally learned the shape of your limits. And you will feel relieved. And that relief will be the saddest thing you have ever felt, and you won't understand why until it is much, much too late. Say the thing. Say it plainly. Say it tonight, in the ordinary light of an ordinary evening, without waiting for it to feel significant enough. It is already significant enough. It has always been significant enough. The words do not need a stone wall above the Atlantic. They just need to leave your body and reach another person while there is still time for that person to feel them. His cup is still on the hall table. I know that sounds like something a grieving woman would say for effect. It isn't. I mean it literally. I have not moved it. 6 years and I have dusted around it, worked my life around it, walked past it every morning on the way to a kitchen where I now make only 1 cup of tea. I don't know why I haven't moved it. I think I keep it there the way you keep a question you can't answer, not because you expect the answer to come, but because putting it away feels like pretending you were never wrong. I was wrong. Not about loving him. I loved Thomas every day of 53 years with a completeness that I still don't have words adequate for, and that, you understand, is precisely the problem. I loved him completely and I communicated it partially, and I told myself the gap between those two things didn't matter. It was the only thing that mattered. There is a bird that comes to the apple tree in the garden some February mornings. Small, brown, unremarkable. I don't know its name. I never learned to name birds. That was Thomas's territory. He knew them all. I see it move through the bare branches in the early light, and I think about standing at the kitchen window the morning he died, watching a bird just like it, telling myself later. I am 91 years old. I have very little later left. You still have yours. Use it.